The scent of pot roast garlic, rosemary, and slow-cooked beef filled my home on the Oregon coast, a familiar comfort that had been a constant in my life for decades. It was a smell that brought me back to my late wife, Eleanor's mother, and the many family dinners we had shared. I had spent 3 hours preparing this meal, a labor of love for what I hoped would be a rare, peaceful evening with my daughter, Eleanor, and my son-in-law, Daniel. The old house, with its panoramic windows overlooking the gray, churning Pacific, felt warm and alive. Eleanor and Daniel arrived with an unsettling quietness, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. They carried a couple of gift bags, a gesture that felt less like an act of love and more like a prop in a play I hadn't been told about. We sat at the kitchen table, the roast steaming in the center, and the silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. It was Eleanor who finally spoke, her voice unnaturally bright. "Dad, Daniel and I have been thinking. It's time for you to move somewhere special, where professionals can take care of you." The words hit me like a physical blow. The fork I held clattered against my plate. "What?" I gripped the back of my chair, my knuckles turning white. What fool came up with this idea? I'm still strong. Daniel, a man whose permanent scowl seemed to have deepened with age, stepped forward. "Arthur, you're not who you used to be. This will be better for everyone." "Better for whom?" I shot back, a cold fury rising in my chest. "Better for you to take over my house?" Eleanor's face crumpled, but it was a practiced, hollow expression. "How can you say that? We care about you." "Care about me?" The laugh that escaped my lips was devoid of humor. "If you cared about me, you wouldn't be sitting in my kitchen talking about shipping me off to some institution." I gestured toward the mantelpiece, lined with photographs of our family's history, a history I had built through 40 years of working 3 jobs to put her through college. 40 years I worked so you could have everything you wanted. Daniel moved closer, his movement subtle but predatory. I had learned to read such body language in my younger days. This wasn't a discussion, it was a trap. "The paperwork is already filed," he said, pulling a manila folder from his jacket. The next morning, the sound of a moving truck pulling into my driveway was a cruel confirmation of my worst fears. I had spent the night barricaded in my bedroom, every light in the house ablaze, my baseball bat across my knees. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the day I'd bought this house, the pride in Eleanor's eyes as she picked out the paint color for her room. Heavy footsteps pounded on my front porch, followed by the doorbell, and then a relentless pounding. "Dad, open up!" Eleanor's voice was shrill, desperate. "We know you're in there." I stayed put, a silent protest. But then I heard the turn of a key in the lock. The spare key I had given Eleanor for emergencies. I heard them enter, their voices echoing in the home that no longer felt like mine. Daniel appeared in my bedroom doorway, 2 large men in moving uniforms behind him. "Don't make this difficult, old man. Your stuff is already packed." I struggled to my feet, my cane sliding across the hardwood floor. "You haven't packed anything," I cried. But one of the movers was already in my closet, pulling shirts off hangers, treating my life like mere inventory. "Stop touching my things!" I swung my cane, but Daniel caught it easily. "Bob, Jim, get his stuff loaded. We're on a schedule." The men moved with a terrifying efficiency, boxing up 40 years of memories in less than an hour. The photo of my wife, the suit I wore to her funeral, my beloved tools, everything disappeared into unmarked boxes. The car ride to Evergreen Gardens was a nightmare of familiar streets seen through the window of Daniel's BMW, like a tourist in my own life. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at me with what might have been regret. At a red light, I tried the door handle. It was locked. "Child safety locks," Daniel said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, a cold, satisfied glint in them. Amazing what they think of these days. The words felt like a final insult, a confirmation of my complete powerlessness. Evergreen Gardens was exactly what its name implied, a beautifully manicured prison. The red brick facade, the perfectly trimmed lawns, and the sign advertising compassionate care were all a facade. The reality was a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, where residents shuffled around in fuzzy slippers, staring blankly at muted televisions. I was confined to room 237, a space smaller than my walk-in closet at home, with beige walls, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. The only personal items they had allowed me to keep were the photo of my late wife, Ellen, and my old toolbox, both looking like artifacts from a different, happier life. I felt a deep sense of despair, of being erased. But despair was a luxury I couldn't afford. They thought they had broken me, but they had underestimated the spirit of a man who had survived a war and raised a daughter alone. I started observing everything with a soldier's eye: the staff schedule, the facility's layout, the rhythms of the residents. Most were resigned to their fate, but a few, I noticed, still had a spark of life in their eyes. They gathered by the window each morning, talking in low voices, their postures defiant. I decided to approach them. The woman had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here either," she said. She was Esther, a retired English teacher. The man with the grease-stained fingernails was Walter, a former engineer. The third, a distinguished-looking man in institutional pajamas, was Henry, a retired lawyer. They were my people, sharp, defiant, and full of stories of betrayal similar to my own. Henry, the lawyer, explained how the facility's administrator, a man named Mark Peterson, was complicit in these family betrayals. "This place profits from keeping families separated while assets get liquidated," he said, his voice grim. "For a fee, of course." My pulse quickened. The pieces were starting to fall into place. They weren't just victims, they were witnesses to a systematic fraud. "What do we do about it?" I asked, a new purpose filling me. "We gather evidence," Henry said, his lawyer's mind already at work. "Document everything. We're not just victims here. We're witnesses to systematic elder abuse." I told them about Eleanor and Daniel, about the pot roast I'd cooked for them, about the cold calculation in their eyes. I showed them the photo of Ellen, a symbol of the life they thought they had erased. My anger, which had been a quiet, burning ember, now flared into a determined fire. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all of us. "So, we're really doing this?" I asked, looking at these three strangers who were now my closest allies. "We're really doing this," Henry confirmed with a grim but determined nod. They picked the wrong old folks to mess with. This wasn't a prison. It was a base of operations. And for the first time since coming here, I didn't feel alone. Thirst became my ally, a perfect excuse to wander the dimly lit hallways after lights out. My cane tapped softly against the linoleum as I made my way toward the administration office, a place normally off-limits to residents. The night staff barely glanced up from their station, seeing only a harmless old man shuffling around. That's when I heard Mark Peterson's voice, low and confident, coming from around the corner. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, a wave of cold fury washing over me as I realized the extent of their betrayal. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers working on muscle memory as I activated the voice memo function. "Yes, Eleanor," Mark's voice said, clear and chillingly casual. "The documents are ready. Your father is officially incapacitated." Eleanor's voice, tiny but audible through the phone, was a new kind of poison. Perfect. "When can we start selling the house?" "Give me a week," Mark replied. "For an extra $5,000, I'll expedite the process." My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to them discuss my life as if it were a business transaction. "The medical evaluation was easy to fabricate," Mark continued. "Dr. Martinez never actually examined him, just signed the forms I prepared." I stood there in the shadows, my phone recording every word of their conspiracy. "They discussed my early dementia, how the doctors here have explained your condition, and how this place was now my home forever. The casual cruelty of it all, the way they treated my life like an expired product, fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for my dignity and for all the others they had victimized." The next day, fortified with the audio evidence, our little group met in Henry's room. The recording played, a chilling testament to the conspiracy against us. Henry, his lawyer's mind already 3 steps ahead, declared it substantial evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Walter, a man whose hands were still calloused from a lifetime of engineering, methodically took to the facility's computer during recreation hour. He pulled up Zillow, his fingers shaking as he pointed at the screen. "Your house is already listed for sale at $380,000. The listing was a gut punch. My home, my wife's garden, the driveway where I had taught Eleanor to parallel park, all of it was reduced to a few marketing bullet points. Family relocation, the listing read. A lie that felt like a final insult. But Henry saw an opportunity. This proves they're actively marketing stolen property while you're still legally competent. Later that afternoon, under the guise of a doctor's appointment, Henry and I took a taxi downtown to the law office of Thomas Green. This was where I had prepared a final, devastating surprise for Eleanor and Daniel. My will, a document I had meticulously crafted after my initial suspicions about Daniel's motives, was waiting for us. The will specifically excludes Eleanor Finch from any inheritance, Thomas explained, citing irreconcilable differences and financial irresponsibility. My entire estate, I had decided, would go to a veterans' charity, a decision that would render all of Eleanor and Daniel's fraudulent efforts completely useless. The legal machinery was now in motion. We had the recording, the fraudulent real estate listing, and the will. It was only a matter of time before they walked directly into the trap we had so carefully set. The following Thursday, Eleanor and Daniel arrived at Evergreen Gardens, their faces a carefully constructed mask of false concern. They carried a briefcase that might as well have been labeled Final Betrayal. I activated my phone's recording app before they reached my chair, my hands now steady with a sense of purpose. "Dad," Eleanor began, her voice a sickly sweet concoction of lies. "You look so much better. The staff here is really taking good care of you." I let my voice sound tired, defeated. "Hello, Eleanor." I played the part of a man who had accepted his fate. Daniel, however, cut straight to the business at hand. "John, just sign here. We're selling the house and buying you a better room." "A better room? Private bathroom? Bigger window?" I asked, my tone laced with feigned confusion. "And you'll have cable television," Eleanor added, her lies flowing effortlessly. "But we need to finalize the sale first. Dad, we need the money now. Daniel has important business deals." I leaned forward, pretending to struggle to read the documents. "What happens to the money from the sale?" "Don't worry about that," Daniel said dismissively. "We'll take care of everything." I held the pen above the signature line, letting them think victory was within reach. "I just want to understand. Once I sign this, what happens to my house?" "New family moves in," Daniel said with a dismissive wave. "And you'll have a nice room here," Eleanor promised, her voice chillingly cold. I set the pen down and looked at my daughter. "I need a minute to think about this. It's a lot to process. My whole life." Daniel's patience finally snapped. "Look, old man, this is happening whether you like it or not. We can do it the easy way or the hard way." The mask had slipped, and my phone had captured every word. "Let me just read through this one more time," I said, maintaining my confused act while buying precious seconds for evidence. The next day, Courtroom 4B, felt like the culmination of everything that had happened since the day they had driven me away. Eleanor and Daniel sat at the defendant's table, their lawyer whispering meaningless reassurances. The judge called the session to order, and Henry, looking every inch the professional he once was, stood for his opening statement. "Your Honor, here's the recording between Miss Finch and the bribed employee, Mark Peterson." My phone speaker filled the courtroom with Eleanor's cold, calculating voice. "Perfect. When can we start selling the house?" Mark's recorded voice echoed. The medical evaluation was easy to fabricate. Dr. Martinez never actually examined him. Eleanor's face went white. Her lawyer quickly objected, but the judge overruled it. The evidence mounted relentlessly. Walter testified about the fraudulent real estate listing. Esther presented her documentation of their suspicious behavior. Henry introduced medical records proving I had never been examined by Dr. Martinez. Then came Mark Peterson's testimony, admitting he had falsified the documents for a fee. "This isn't true!" Eleanor sobbed, desperation in her voice. "You selfish old man. You're going to die soon anyway." Daniel exploded, his rage unmasked. Judge Davis's gavel echoed. But I wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence." Thomas Green approached the bench with my will, properly authenticated and sealed. "This document dated the 15th of August, 2024, represents Mr. Finch's last will and testament," Thomas announced. "The will leaves Mr. Finch's entire estate to a veterans medical center. Eleanor Finch is specifically excluded from any inheritance. The silence was deafening. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. What? That's impossible. Every crime you committed, I said quietly, was for property you would never inherit anyway. Judge Davis found sufficient evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse, issuing arrest warrants for both Eleanor Finch and Daniel Williams. As the handcuffs clicked around my daughter's wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. As the police officers led Eleanor and Daniel away in handcuffs, their sobs echoing through the courthouse halls, I felt a sense of profound calm. The game was over. I had not only survived their betrayal, but had exposed a far larger criminal enterprise. Justice had prevailed, not just for me, but for all the others Mark Peterson had victimized. Henry, Walter, and Esther stood beside me, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and the quiet triumph of people who had found strength in their shared vulnerability. As we left the courthouse, the city of Portland felt different. The air was cleaner, the sky seemed brighter, and for the first time in months, I felt truly free. We were no longer victims. We were a family forged in crisis, bound by a shared fight for dignity and truth. Back at Evergreen Gardens, I collected my belongings. My toolbox, Ellen's photograph, every personal item that had been treated as mere inventory, now felt like a reclaimed piece of my soul. The new administrator, a man flustered by the unfolding scandal, stammered apologies, but I simply shook my head. "Your apologies are noted," I replied coolly, and rejected. Henry, Walter, and Esther stood beside my packed car, 4 people who had found family, in the most unlikely of circumstances. "Thursday dinner's at my house," I announced, "starting this week." I smiled, thinking of Ellen. She always said a good meal shared with friends was the closest thing to heaven on earth. The drive home took me through the familiar streets of my neighborhood. Instead of nostalgia, I felt a deep sense of anticipation. My house welcomed me back like an old friend. The kitchen where Eleanor had betrayed me now seemed brighter, ready for new memories. The dining room, where we had shared so many family meals, would now host my chosen family. Thursday evening arrived with the smell of pot roast and the sound of laughter. Walter brought a bottle of wine, Esther a homemade apple pie. Henry gave me an update on the case. Eleanor and Daniel were facing federal fraud charges, and a class action lawsuit was being prepared for the other 47 families. This scandal, he said, was going to reshape elder care regulations nationwide. We ate, talked, and laughed until almost midnight. 4 people who had found something infinitely more valuable than blood relations, a chosen family, tempered by justice and bound by unwavering respect. Later, after my friends had gone home, I sat in my recliner, looking at Ellen's photograph on the mantelpiece. The woman who had loved me for 22 years smiled back, surrounded by pictures of a daughter who had chosen greed over love. "She made her choice, sweetheart," I whispered to the photo, "and I made mine." Outside, the Pacific Ocean reflected the moonlight, its waves crashing against the shore with a steady rhythm. The old man they had tried to discard had not only survived, he had triumphed. My home, my life, and my heart were full again, a testament to the fact that real family isn't determined by blood, but by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. My legacy would not be a house or a bank account, but a story of resilience, love, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. I lit a single candle on the dinner table, a small celebration of a life reclaimed. It was a new beginning.